You think you can hide this from me? I told you everything I know. I'm not lying.
Please, both of you, stop.
Calvin Brooks threw that wrench across the shop floor so hard it cracked the concrete. It skidded all the way under the lift, rang like a bell in an empty church. And for the first time in 15 years, the man everybody called the charity mechanic stood right in the middle of his own garage, with his fists shaking and nothing left to lose. 11 hours later, he was kneeling in freezing rain, changing a flat tire for a crying teenage girl who wouldn't tell him her name, and refusing every dollar she offered. He had no idea who her mother was. He had no idea that one phone call the very next morning was about to blow his entire life wide open. The alarm went off at 4:40 in the morning, same as it had every single morning for 11 years. Calvin Brooks shut it off before the second beep, so it wouldn't wake his daughter. He lay there in the dark for exactly 1 minute. He always gave himself 1 minute. That was the deal he'd made with himself a long time ago. 1 minute to be tired, 1 minute to be sad, 1 minute to be a 38-year-old widower with $41 in his register and a mortgage on a building nobody wanted. Then the minute was over, and he got up. He got up. The floor was cold. The heat had been off since November, because the furnace repair was $400, and $400 was Amara's winter coat, her boots, and a full month of groceries. He'd bought a space heater instead and put it in her room, and told her he liked the cold, that it woke him up, that his own daddy used to say, "Cold air builds character." She'd looked at him with those eyes, 8 years old and already too smart for her own good, and said, "Dad, you are the worst liar in America." He smiled about it now in the dark, pulling on the same pair of coveralls he'd worn yesterday and the day before, the ones with Brooks stitched over the heart in thread that used to be red and had faded to the color of old brick. Down in the kitchen, he cracked 2 eggs into the pan, started the coffee, and stood there with his hands on the counter, listening to the house breathe. Then he looked at the envelope on the table. It had been sitting there for 6 days. He'd opened it once. That was enough. He knew what it said, the way a man knows what a doctor's face means, before the doctor says a single word. He picked it up anyway. He read it again anyway. Men do that. They pick at it like a scab. Final notice. Commercial property loan number 44912, Brooks Auto and Tire. Past due, $18,240. Payment in full required within 30 days, or the institution will proceed with foreclosure. 30 days. 6 of them were already gone. He heard the stairs creak and had the envelope folded in his back pocket before her foot hit the bottom step. "You're up early," he said, without turning around. "So are you." "I'm always up early. I'm the dad. That's the job." Amara Brooks climbed onto the stool at the counter in her school clothes, with her hair already done. She did it herself now, had been doing it for 2 years. Ever since the morning he'd tried a ponytail and she'd looked in the mirror and asked, very gently, if he had done it on purpose. She pulled her backpack up beside her like it was a passenger. "Eggs," she said. "Eggs again. You want to talk to the chef about it? You're the chef. Then take it up with him. He's very sensitive." She laughed. God, that laugh. It sounded like her mother. It had sounded like her mother since she was 4 years old, and it wrecked him every single time, and he never once let her see it. He slid the plate in front of her, leaned on the counter across from her, and watched her eat the way he did every morning, because it was the only part of the day that belonged entirely to him. "Dad." "Yeah." "Are we okay?" He didn't blink. He'd gotten good at not blinking. "What kind of question is that?" "A regular one." "We're fine, baby." Because Bethany Crail said something. He straightened up slow. "Said what?" Amara pushed a piece of egg around her plate. She said her dad said your shop is closing. She said her dad said you're a... She stopped. Say it. I don't want to say it, Amara. Look at me. If somebody says something about your daddy, you can say it in this kitchen. This kitchen is safe. Anything you can say out there, you can say in here. Say it. She looked up. She said her dad said, "You're a charity case pretending to be a business." The coffee maker gurgled. Outside, a truck went by with a bad exhaust. And he identified it without even meaning to. Bill Hurley's F-150. The muffler he'd told Bill about twice. "Okay," Calvin said. "That's it. Okay. What do you want me to do, sweetheart?" "Go over to Bethany Crail's house at 5 in the morning and argue with an 8-year-old. You could argue with her dad. Her dad, Calvin, exhaled slow through his nose. Her dad's got a $30,000 alignment machine and a sign that lights up. That's what he's got. Now let me ask you something. What do I have? Amara didn't hesitate. Me! He had to look out the window for a second. That's right, he said. That's exactly right. So let Ray Crail have his sign. She ate for a minute. Then quietly, "It's not fair, though." "No," Calvin said. "It's not." He didn't lie to her about that. He never lied to her about that. He'd lied about the heat, and he'd lied about liking cold air. But he'd never once told his daughter the world was fair, because one day she was going to find out. And he wanted her to find out from a man who loved her, instead of from a stranger who didn't. Brooks Auto and Tire sat at the dead end of Delford Street, where the town's money had stopped flowing around 1994 and never came back. It was a cinder block building with 2 bays, 1 lift, a hand-painted sign so faded you could only read BRKAUT and TIE if the light hit it just right, and a gravel lot with a pothole Calvin had been filling with the same bucket of cold patch for 6 years. Directly across the street, and this was the joke of it, this was the punchline God had written and never bothered to explain, sat Crail Precision Automotive. 9 bays, LED sign, waiting room with leather chairs, a coffee machine that made 4 kinds of coffee, and a television bolted to the wall playing sports with the sound off. Ray Crail had bought that lot in 2016 and built it facing Calvin's shop directly, windows to windows, like a man building a mansion across from a shack just so he could look at it while he ate. Calvin unlocked his door at 6:15, rolled up the bay, turned on the lights, and the 3rd fluorescent tube flickered and died, the way it had been threatening to for a month. "Of course you did," he said to it. He was under a Buick by 6:40 when he heard the laughing. He knew that laugh. Everybody on Delford Street knew that laugh. Ray Crail crossed the street with his coffee in a Crail Precision mug, in a Crail Precision polo, with Tommy Pike trailing behind him the way a small dog trails a bigger one. Ray was 52, thick through the shoulders, and had one of those faces that always looked like it had just finished telling a joke at somebody else's expense. Cal Ray called out, "Cal, buddy." Calvin rolled out from under the Buick, but didn't get up. "Ray, how's business?" "Business is business. That's what I love about you." Ray sipped his coffee, looking around the shop the way a man looks at a car he's about to lowball. "You know Marlene Ellis came to me last week. Wanted a brake job. I quoted her 640. She says, well, Calvin does it for 200. Ray laughed. Tommy Pike laughed a half-second later, because that was Tommy's whole job. 200, Cal. That's not a price, that's a donation. She's 74 years old, Ray. So Calvin didn't move. She's got a fixed income and a bad hip, and she drives to dialysis twice a week. So that's her situation. That ain't my situation. Ray gestured at Calvin's shop with the mug, a little wave that took in the cracked floor, the flickering light, the dead sign. And look what your situation got you. 15 years, Cal. 15 years and you can't buy a light bulb. You know what they call you over at the diner? I've heard it. The charity mechanic. I've heard it. It's not a compliment. Calvin stood up, wiped his hands on the rag. Ray was a big man, but Calvin was bigger. And there was a half second there. There was always a half second, every single time, where Ray remembered that and shifted his weight and covered it with another sip of coffee. Was there something you needed, Ray? Just being neighborly. Actually, Ray snapped his fingers like it had just occurred to him, and it hadn't. Because nothing ever just occurred to Ray Crail. Actually, yeah, little birdie tells me the bank sent you paper. The rag stopped in Calvin's hands. Where'd you hear that, small town? Ray smiled. Gordon over at First Cumberland plays golf with me on Thursdays. Now don't get sore, I'm not here to gloat. You're absolutely here to gloat. I'm here to help. Ray spread his arms wide. Cal, listen. I'll take the lot off you, whole thing, building, land, whatever's left in here. I'll pay off the bank and put 10 grand in your pocket, cash, and you can walk away clean with your head up. 10 grand? That's a year of rent somewhere. That's a fresh start for you and your little girl. Calvin looked at him for a long moment. How much is the lot worth, Ray? That's what we'd have to. 68,000. Calvin said it flat. That's the assessment. I've got it right here in the drawer. 68,000 for the land alone. More if the county ever runs that bypass through, which they've been talking about for 4 years. Ray's smile stayed on his face but stopped doing anything. So what you're offering me, Calvin said, is about 15 cents on the dollar, on account of me being desperate. I'm offering you a rope, Cal. You're offering me a rope with a knot in it. Tommy Pike laughed at that, then realized what he'd done, and stopped. Ray's jaw worked. He turned and started back across the street. Then he stopped halfway, and turned around, and said the thing he'd come to say the whole time. You could see it on him. The way you can see when a man has been carrying a sentence in his mouth all morning. You know what your problem is, Calvin? You think being a good man is a business plan. No. Calvin said it quietly. I just think it's the only thing I've got that you can't buy. Ray stared at him. Then he laughed, and the laugh was ugly, and he walked back to his 9 bays and his lit-up sign. Tommy Pike lingered. Tommy was 26 and had a face like an apology. Mr. Brooks? Go on, Tommy. He don't mean it. He means every word of it, Calvin said, and rolled back under the Buick. That's the only honest thing about him. At 9:20, Marlene Ellis came in. She came in the way she always came in, sideways through the door, apologizing before she'd even said anything, clutching a coin purse with both hands like it was a bird that might get away. Calvin, honey, I'm sorry. Morning, Miss Marlene. I know I said I'd have the rest of it by the 1st, but Denise's boy got sick and they had to take him down to Nashville, and I gave her the gas money. I know that's not your problem. That's not your problem at all, Miss Marlene. Calvin came around the counter and put his hand on the counter, palm down, the way you'd calm a horse. Stop. Breathe. She stopped. She breathed. Now he said, What's the car doing? Her chin trembled. It's making the noise again. The grinding. And I've got dialysis Thursday, and I've got nobody to take me. Denise is in Nashville, and I... Pull it in. Calvin, I can give you $30. You can give me nothing, Calvin Brooks. His voice was firm, but kind. Miss Marlene, I'm going to say this once, and then we're going to talk about something else. He leaned on the counter. You brought me a plate of chicken and dumplings every Sunday for 6 months after Danielle died. Every Sunday. You never asked me if I wanted it. You never let me say no. You want to know what your credit's worth in this shop? It's worth more than money. Now pull the car in before I lose my patience. She cried a little. She did that thing older women do, where they press their fingers under their eyes and get mad at themselves for crying. You're a good boy, she said. I'm 38. You're a good boy, she said again. Harder this time, like she was correcting the record for God himself. He got the car up on the lift. The rear brakes were metal on metal. She'd been driving on nothing but noise and prayer for a full month. He had a set of brake pads on the shelf he'd been saving to sell. $84 of inventory. He looked at the pads. He looked at the envelope in his back pocket. He put the pads on the car. And across the street through the window, Ray Crail watched him do it, turned to Tommy Pike, said something, and they both laughed. The bank man came at 2 o'clock, Gordon Veeder, khakis, a rental car haircut, a leather folder he opened on the counter like he was serving a warrant. Mr. Brooks, I want you to know this is not personal. It never is. The institution has been more than patient. 22 years my daddy banked at First Cumberland, Calvin said. 22 years. He shook Bill Cumberland's hand in 1988, and that was the loan, whole loan, a handshake. Yes. Well, First Cumberland was acquired in 2019. I know when it was acquired. Veeder cleared his throat. $18,240, 24 days. May I ask, do you have a plan? Calvin looked at him. Really looked at him. Veeder was maybe 30. Nice kid, probably. Probably had a wife and a starter house and a boss who yelled at him. Probably went home and told her he hated this part. You want to know my plan? Calvin said. For the record, yes, my plan is I open at 6:15 and I close at 7. And I fix whatever comes through that door. And I do it right the first time so it doesn't come back. That's been my plan for 15 years. It's the only one I've got. Vetter wrote something down. He wrote it in the way a man writes something he doesn't want to write. Mr. Brooks, I'll be honest with you. That's not a plan. That's a habit. Calvin didn't answer. Vader closed his folder. At the door, he stopped. There's a party expressing interest in the parcel. If it goes to auction, I'm not permitted to say who. You don't have to. No, Vader said. I suppose I don't. Amara got off the bus at 3:35 and came into the shop and threw her backpack in the corner where she always threw it. And Calvin knew from the sound of the throw that something was wrong. He didn't ask right away. You don't ask a kid right away. You let them get in the room. He went back under the hood of the Buick. She climbed up on the stool by the toolbox and started spinning it slow. 2 minutes. 3. Then, Dad. H, how much money do we have? He came out from under the hood. Why, because Bethany Crail said. Her dad's going to buy your shop. Calvin set the wrench down very carefully on the fender. Very, very carefully. She said that today at lunch, in front of everybody. Amara's chin was doing the same thing Marlene Ellis's chin had done, and it just about took him apart. She said her dad said, we're going to have to move. She said she felt sorry for me. She said it in the voice, the sorry voice. What did you do? Nothing. Amara. Her hands twisted in her lap. I said, my dad's shop is the best shop in town, and everybody knows it, and she said, if it's the best shop, then how come it looks like that Calvin sat down on the creeper? Sat all the way down. So he was below her. So she was looking down at him instead of up. He'd learned that from Danielle. Get under them, Cal. Never talk down to her. Get under her and let her stand on you. Come here. She came. He took both her hands. I want to tell you something. And I want you to remember it when you're old and I'm gone. Dad, just listen. A man named Ray Crail across the street has a sign that lights up. Cost him $12,000. You know what's under that sign? What Ray Crail? Calvin shrugged. That's it. That's all that's under it. A sign is just paint and electricity, baby. It doesn't tell you one single true thing about what's inside, but people look at the sign. Yeah, he said, they do. Most people never look at anything else. He squeezed her hands. But some of them do. Some people walk right past the sign and come find the man. And those are the only people whose opinion has ever been worth a nickel to me. You understand?" She was quiet. Then she said something that dropped him straight through the floor. "Dad, your shop feels like a place where people are safe." He couldn't speak for a second. "Yeah," he managed. "It's the safest place I know." Amara said, "It's safer than school. It's safer than the house even. Because in here, you're always right there. And everybody who comes in is scared about something. And then they leave. And they're not scared anymore." She shrugged like it was obvious, like it was the most ordinary observation in the world. "That's what you do. You unscare people." Calvin Brooks, who had buried his wife, who had raised a daughter alone, who had not cried in front of another human being since 2017, got up fast and walked over to the parts washer and stood there with his back turned, and made a great show of looking for something in a drawer. "Dad." "I'm good, baby. Are you crying? I'm the worst liar in America, so I'm not going to answer that." The rain started at 5:40. Not a nice rain, the kind that comes in November in that part of the country, with a wind behind it cold enough to make your knuckles ache in about 90 seconds. Amara did homework at the desk under the one lamp that worked. Calvin closed out the register at 6:50. He counted it twice. $41. Then he counted it a third time, which is a thing a man does when he's hoping arithmetic will show him mercy. $41. He'd put $84 of brake pads on Marlene Ellis's hopefully, and taken in $41 for the whole day. That was the entire ledger of Brooks Auto and Tire on the 4th Tuesday in November, 24 days out from foreclosure. That's when it happened. The thing he'd never done. Not once. Not when Danielle got the diagnosis, not at the funeral, not the first night Amara woke up screaming for her mother and he didn't know what to do. So he just sat on her bedroom floor until sunrise. He picked up the 3/4-inch wrench off the bench, and he threw it. He threw it hard, sidearm, everything in him behind it. 15 years of it all. All the Sundays, all the Ray Crails, all the 640 brake jobs he'd done for 200, all the light bulbs he couldn't buy. It hit the concrete and cracked it, and skipped and clanged, and rang under the lift like a bell in an empty church. Then silence, and a small voice from the desk. Dad. He stood there with his fists shaking. He turned around. She was looking at him with her pencil still in her hand. Not scared of him. Never scared of him, scared for him, which was 1,000 times worse. Calvin walked over, got down on one knee. "I'm sorry." "It's okay." "No, it didn't. That was..." He rubbed his face with a greasy hand and left a mark and didn't notice. "That was me being weak in front of you, and you're never going to see it again, Dad." Amara put her hand on his cheek. 8 years old, it's not weak to be mad. Mama used to throw stuff all the time. He laughed. It came out broken. "Your mama had an arm on her too." "I know, you told me. The plate." She threw a plate at the wall over a parking ticket. "And you kept the peace." He tapped his chest pocket, where there was in fact a chip of blue ceramic he'd carried for 11 years. "Best day of my life." "She threw a plate at you." "Best day of my life," he said again, and this time the laugh was real. And she laughed too, and the shop was okay again. He went and picked up the wrench and set it on the bench. He looked at the crack in the floor. "Add it to the list," he said. "What list?" "The list of things I'm going to fix when I'm rich." "What's number 1 on the list?" "The sign," he said without even thinking about it. "Number 1's always been the sign." He was pulling the bay door down at 7:06 when the headlights swung into the lot. He almost didn't stop. God knows he almost didn't stop. He had the door at chest height. His shoulders were done, and there was a thawed pack of chicken thighs at home. He'd promised her he'd cook. But the lights came in wrong. Too fast at the turn, then too slow, then a hard stop, half over the pothole. And that told him everything. That was a driver who wasn't seeing the lot. That was somebody driving on autopilot with their head somewhere else entirely. He pushed the door back up. "Stay inside," he told Amara. "Who is it?" "Don't know yet." "Stay inside and let me look." It was a Range Rover, 2 years old, black, the big one, $60,000, $70,000, sitting in a gravel lot on Delford Street, where nothing that nice had parked in a decade. Calvin's first thought, if he was honest, was lost. Rich folks get off the interstate, miss a turn, end up down here, panicked, turn around in his lot. Happened 4 or 5 times a year. His second thought came when he got close enough to see the front passenger tire. It wasn't flat. It was gone. Shredded. Torn down to the belts, rubber hanging off it in strips, and the rim had been driven on. You could see the shine where metal had eaten road. "Oh, sweetheart," Calvin said out loud. "How far did you drive on that?" Then he saw her. She was behind the wheel with both hands still on it, at 10 and 2, staring straight ahead through the windshield, at nothing. And she was crying. Not delicate crying, not movie crying. She was crying the way people cry when they think they're alone. Face wrecked, shoulders going, mouth open with no sound. A kid, 17, maybe 18. Calvin stopped about 8 feet from the door and did the math. A black man in a small American town, at 7 in the evening, in the rain. When there's a crying white teenage girl in a $70,000 car in his parking lot. He did that math in about half a second, because he'd been doing it his whole life. Then he stepped into the light so she could see him clearly, hands out, where they could be seen. Empty. He knocked on the glass with one knuckle, twice, soft. She jerked so hard her elbow hit the horn, and it blared and she screamed. "It's okay." Calvin said it through the glass, not moving 1 inch closer. "It's okay. I'm right here. I own this shop. My name's Calvin. I own this shop right here. That's my name on the building. I'm not going to come any closer than this." She stared at him with her hands over her mouth. "You hear me? I'm not going to move. You just breathe." She breathed. Sort of. "There you go. The window came down about 3 inches. Her voice was destroyed. I'm sorry. I'll move. I'm on your..." "You're not parked. You stopped. There's a difference." He kept his voice level, the same voice he'd used on Marlene Ellis, the same voice he'd used on his own daughter 40 minutes ago. "Do you know your tire's gone? It's..." She looked at it and made a sound. "Oh my God. Oh my God, is that? Did I do that? How long have you been driving on it? I don't know." "How long, sweetheart? I don't know." It came out of her like something tearing loose, and then she flinched, like she was afraid of getting hit for raising her voice. Calvin saw that flinch, filed it away, did not like it one bit. I'm sorry, I don't know. I heard a bang somewhere back on the county road. I just kept driving." "You just kept driving?" "Yes." "For how many miles?" She didn't answer. He looked back down the road. The county road was 11 miles of nothing. No lights, no shoulder, ditches on both sides. A girl had driven 11 miles on a bare rim in the dark, in the rain. Sparks coming off the front end. And hadn't stopped. Not because she couldn't, because she hadn't noticed. Calvin had been alive long enough to know what that meant. "That's not a car problem." "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. Here's what's happening. Your rim's damaged. Your tire's finished. And you're not driving that thing another block. Not 1 block. Now, you got somebody you can call?" "No. I have a phone." She laughed and it was awful. "I have a very nice phone. But nobody to call." She looked at him, rain running down the glass between them. And she said in the flattest voice he'd ever heard come out of a kid, There's nobody who wants to hear from me right now. Calvin Brooks stood in the rain and felt something in his chest turn over. "All right," he said. "Well, lucky for you. You didn't call anybody. You landed in the right parking lot." "Your shop's closed." "Yeah, the sign says closed. I read it. That's why I stopped. I thought it was empty." "I thought nobody would—" She stopped. "You thought nobody'd see you," Calvin said. She didn't say anything. That was the answer. "Well," he rubbed the rain off his face. "Here's the thing about that sign. That sign doesn't work half the time anyhow. Never has. Been meaning to fix it for 6 years. He nodded toward the bay. "I'm going to go get my jack and my breaker bar. That's it. That's all I'm getting. You can watch me the whole time. I'm going to stay in the light. You can lock your doors. Keep them locked. I don't care. I'm not going to ask you to get out of that car. But that wheel's coming off and a spare's going on. And then you're going home. You understand me?" Her mouth trembled. "I can't pay you right now." Calvin stopped walking. He turned around. "Did I ask you for money?" "No." "But did I say one word about money?" "No." "Then don't put words in my mouth, young lady. I've got enough of my own. And for the first time..." For 1 second, something happened on that girl's face that wasn't misery. It was surprise. Pure, blank surprise. Like a person who'd been handed something in a language they didn't speak. He worked in the rain for 22 minutes. She got out at minute 4. He didn't ask her to. She just did. Stood there under the bay's overhang, about 10 feet back, with her arms wrapped around herself, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Calvin's truck, shivering hard enough that he could hear her teeth. He didn't look up at her. He'd figured out already that being looked at was the thing hurting her most, so he kept his eyes on the wheel, and talked to the wheel. "Lug nuts are seized. That's not your fault. That's whoever put them on with an impact gun and no torque wrench, which is about 90% of the tire shops in this county. Nothing. You've got a full-size spare under the back. That's good news. A lot of these new ones, they give you a donut the size of a dinner plate and tell you good luck. Nothing. Then small. Why are you talking to me? Because it's cold and you're standing there, and it'd be rude not to." Silence. Rain on the metal roof. "Most people ask me questions," she said. "About what? About who I am?" Calvin grunted, leaning on the breaker bar. The nut broke loose with a crack. "That's 1. 4 to go." "Aren't you going to ask?" "Nope." "Why not?" "Because you've been crying for about an hour," Calvin said. "And in my experience, when somebody's been crying for an hour, the last thing on God's earth they want is a stranger asking them questions." He heard her breath hitch behind him. He set the second nut on the ground. "Besides," he added, "I don't need to know who you are. I need to know what size wheel you've got. And I already know that." There was a long pause. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh if you were generous. At minute 11, he went into the shop and came back out with 2 things. He handed one to her. A bottle of water. Warm from sitting on the shelf. She looked at it like it was a live animal. "Take it. I'm not thirsty. You've been crying for an hour. You're dehydrated whether you feel it or not. And you've got a drive ahead of you. Drink this before you drive." Sienna Whitmore, though he didn't know that name yet, and wouldn't for another 14 hours, took the bottle of water in both hands and stood there and looked at it. And then her face came apart. Not crying like before, worse, like something structural had failed. She sat down, just sat right down on the wet concrete lip of the bay, in her $1,000 coat, and put the bottle in her lap and sobbed into her hands with her whole body. Calvin didn't move toward her. He set the breaker bar down quietly, and he sat down too, 8 feet away, back against the tire he'd just pulled off. And he waited. He waited a long time. "I'm sorry," she got it out finally. You keep saying that. I don't know why. It's just water. Yeah, Calvin said. I know. And she looked up at him with her ruined face, and something in the way he said it, yeah, I know, told her that he did know. That he wasn't confused. That he'd understood the whole thing from the second she rolled the window down 3 inches. You don't even know me, she whispered. Nope. Then why are you being nice to me? Calvin Brooks looked at that kid sitting on his wet concrete in the rain. 11 miles of ruined rim behind her. Nobody in the world she felt she could call. He thought about his daughter inside the shop, doing long division under a lamp. He thought about the envelope in his back pocket. He thought about $41 in a register. Long time ago, he said, I was 23 years old. I broke down on the interstate outside Knoxville with $11 in my pocket and a wife 6 months pregnant in the passenger seat. Middle of the night, February, and a man stopped. Old white fella, drove a wrecker, name of Earl. He towed us 40 miles, fixed my water pump in his own driveway, and wouldn't take a dime. I asked him why. You know what he said? He said, somebody did it for me in 1971. You'll do it for somebody else. That's the whole system. Calvin got up and went back to the wheel. That's it, he said. That's the whole answer. I'm not a good man, sweetheart. I'm just in the system. Across the street, in the bright yellow light of Crail Precision Automotive, Ray Crail stood at the window with Tommy Pike beside him. Look at this, Ray said. Look at this right here. That's a Rover. That's a $90,000 Rover, Tommy. And that man is out there doing it for free. You don't know that. I know that. Ray sipped his coffee. You want to bet me $20? Says he doesn't take $1? Tommy Pike watched Calvin Brooks kneeling in the freezing rain and watched the girls sitting on the concrete. And something moved in Tommy's face that he didn't have a name for. I'm not taking that bet, he said quietly. Why not? Because I'd lose. At minute 22, Calvin torqued the last nut, dropped the jack, and stood up. His knees screamed. He ignored them. You're done. She was on her feet by then, wallet out, a black card in her hand. Calvin had never seen one in person, only in movies. Even in the rain, in the dark, he could tell it wasn't plastic. It had weight. Please, she said. Please just take whatever. Take all of it. I don't care. Put it away. You don't understand. I have put it away. Why? And there it was, the real thing, the thing under all of it, ripping out of her at full volume in an empty parking lot. Why won't you take it? Everybody takes it. Everybody in my entire life takes it. That's what it's for. That's the only thing I'm for. She stopped, both hands over her mouth, horrified at what had come out. Rain. Calvin Brooks stood there soaked through, with a wrench in his hand and mud to his elbows. Sweetheart, he said gently. Somebody helped me once when I needed it. I'm just passing it forward. That's all this is. It's not a favor, and it's not charity, and you don't owe me one thing. He waited until she looked up. And it's got not one single thing to do with your money. I don't want it. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. You could be the richest kid in America, or you could be broke as I am. Same tire, same rain, same price. She stared at him. Now go home, he said. Go slow. That spare is fine, but don't push it over 60. She got in the car. She sat there for a second, then the window came down all the way, and she looked out at him, and her face had changed. It had changed in a way that Calvin would think about for the rest of his life. Nobody's ever done that, she said. Done what? Given me something. And she drove out onto Delford Street, turned left toward the highway, and was gone. Calvin stood in his lot in the rain for a minute, holding a wrench, ruined tire at his feet, $41 in his register. Then he went inside, rolled the door down, toweled off his head, and looked at his daughter, who had watched the entire thing through the window and hadn't said one word about it. What he said. Amara just smiled at him. Nothing she said. Nothing Dad. He put her to bed at 9:40 and stood in the doorway the way he did every night. Dad, go to sleep. Who was she? Just somebody with a flat tire. She was crying. Yeah. Is she okay now? Calvin thought about it. He thought about the flinch when she'd raised her voice. He thought about, there's nobody who wants to hear from me right now. He thought about a kid driving 11 miles on a bare rim without noticing. I don't know, baby, he said honestly. I hope so. You unscared her, though. I changed a tire, Dad. Amara rolled over and pulled the blanket up. You unscared her. I could see it from the window. He turned off her light. He didn't sleep. He lay in the cold with the envelope on the nightstand and did the same arithmetic he'd been doing for 6 days. 18,240 divided by 24 days, divided by $41. And every road it went down ended in the same place. Ray Crail standing in this shop with a clipboard, and Amara in a different school in a different town, telling a different set of kids that her daddy used to have a garage. At 6:12 the next morning, while he was standing at the counter cracking 2 eggs into a pan, his phone lit up on the table. Unknown number. Calvin Brooks looked at it ringing there beside a foreclosure notice and almost let it go to voicemail. Then he picked it up. Is this Calvin Brooks? A woman's voice. Calm, too calm. The kind of calm a man learns to distrust. Because, in Calvin's experience, nobody was ever that calm at 6:12 in the morning. Unless they'd already decided something about you. Speaking. Do you own the repair shop on Delford Street? I do. He turned the burner down. Ma'am, if this is about a warranty, it isn't. If it's about a bill, it isn't that either. A pause. He heard something on her end. Paper. A pen set down. Mr. Brooks, my name is Victoria Whitmore. Calvin didn't say anything. He didn't say anything because the eggs were burning, and he'd stopped seeing them, because that name had come through the phone and landed in his kitchen like a piece of furniture nobody had ordered. Everybody knew that name. It was on the side of 2 buildings downtown. It was on the trucks that ran the interstate at 4 in the morning. It was on a plaque at the hospital where Danielle had died. Big brass letters in the lobby. Whitmore Family Wing. And he had walked past it every day for 9 weeks holding his wife's hand and never once thought about it as a person. Mr. Brooks, I'm here. You went quiet. I'm aware of that, ma'am. You know the name. Everybody knows the name, Calvin said. That's kind of the point of it, isn't it? Something happened on the other end of the line. It might have been a breath. It might have been a laugh that didn't get all the way out. My daughter came home last night, Victoria Whitmore said, and Calvin Brooks, standing in a cold kitchen at 6:12 in the morning, with an eviction notice on the table and $41 in his register, said the only thing that came into his head. Is she okay? There was a silence on the line that went on so long, he checked the screen to see if she'd hung up. What? Your daughter, is she okay? She was pretty torn up last night, and she'd driven a good ways on that rim. And I've been thinking about her since about 10 o'clock. So is she okay? Another silence. Mr. Brooks, Victoria said slowly, I have been on this phone since 5:30 this morning. I have spoken to my head of security, my attorney, and the man who runs my family office. Every single one of them asked me the same first question. What'd they ask? What does he want Calvin looked at? The burnt eggs? Well, he said, I want to know if she's okay. He heard her set something down. He heard a chair move. She's asleep, Victoria said. She got home at 8:40. She came into my office, which she does not do. She has not voluntarily come into my office in... She stopped. Started over. She stood in the door, And she told me a man in a garage fixed her tire in the rain and wouldn't take her money, and gave her a bottle of water, and didn't ask her name. And then she started crying. And she couldn't stop. And I couldn't get another word out of her. And she went upstairs and she's been asleep since.
Okay, Calvin said. That's not an ordinary thing for her. No, ma'am.
I didn't imagine it was. My daughter does not cry in front of me, Mr. Brooks. She cried in front of me, and I'm a stranger with dirty hands. I wouldn't take that personal if I were you. Sometimes it's easier with a stranger. There's no bill at the end of it. He heard her breathe out. You know, she said, "You're not what I expected." You had a picture in your head. I had 3 pages in my head. My security team had a file on you by 5:50. Would you like to know what's in it? Not particularly. Calvin James Brooks, 38, widower, 1 daughter age 8, 15 years at the same address, 211 verified customer reviews, average 4.9. No lawsuits, no complaints filed with the state board, no liens except, ma'am, except one from First Cumberland Bank filed 19 days ago on the property itself for $18,240. Calvin set the pan in the sink. The metal hissed. You had somebody look me up before 6 in the morning, he said. Yes, why? Because a man who does something for nothing, Victoria Whitmore said, is either the best person you'll meet all year or the most expensive one. That's a hell of a way to live. It's kept me alive. No, ma'am. Calvin leaned on the counter. It's kept you rich. Those aren't the same thing. Now, if you don't mind, I've got a kid to get to a bus stop. So, did you call to thank me or did you call to check me out? Because you can only do one before you hang up. He heard her actually laugh then. 1 syllable of it, sharp and surprised. Like something had gotten past a guard that hadn't been gotten past in a long time. I called, she said, to ask if you take appointments. Calvin blinked. Appointments, I have a vehicle I'd like looked at. Man, you have a fleet. You've got a whole building full of people whose entire job is looking at your vehicles. So what do you need me for? That Victoria Whitmore said is exactly the question I intend to answer. 9 o'clock today. Is that a problem? 9's fine. Mr. Brooks, I'd like to be clear about something before I come. I'm not bringing you a check. I don't want you to spend the next 3 hours imagining that I am. Calvin's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I wasn't imagining anything. Everyone imagines it. Then you've been meeting the wrong people your whole life, and I'm sorry to hear it. 9 o'clock, doors open at 6:15, but 9's fine. And bring the registration. Because I don't work on a car I can't confirm belongs to whoever's standing in front of me. A pause. You're going to ask me for a registration. I ask everybody for a registration. That's how it works down here. And he hung up on Victoria Whitmore. He stood there for about 4 seconds. Then he said out loud to an empty kitchen, "Oh, you idiot." Who was that Amara was standing on the bottom step in her school clothes? Nobody. You're the worst liar in America. So I've been told. He scraped the eggs in the trash and started 2 more. It was a customer. You yelled at a customer? I did not yell. I firmly conversed. Dad, she climbed onto the stool. You told a customer to bring their registration. You never ask for registration. Miss Marlene doesn't even have a registration. You told me she keeps it in a drawer at her house since 2011. Eat your eggs. Who was it? Calvin set the plate down. Looked at her. You remember that girl last night, the one you unscared? That was her mama. Amara's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Is she mad? And it hit him that his 8-year-old daughter's first instinct, on hearing that a rich white woman had called her father about her daughter, was, is she mad? Something cold went through Calvin Brooks that had nothing to do with the furnace. No, baby, he said. She's not mad. Then what does she want? Calvin looked out the window at the gray coming up over the roofline. That, he said, is the exact right question. He got to the shop at 6:10. and did something he had not done in 6 years. He cleaned it. Not a wipe down, a clean. He swept the bay twice, rolled the parts washer back against the wall, took every wrench out of the top box and laid them back in by size, which they already were, because they had been for 15 years, but he did it anyway, with his hands shaking a little. He wiped the counter. He wiped it again. He found a can of degreaser and got down on his knees and went at the crack in the concrete where the wrench had hit, like he could scrub the anger out of the floor. At 7:40, he caught himself standing in the middle of his own shop, looking at it the way a stranger would, and he hated himself for it. "No," he said out loud. He put the rag down. "No, sir." Because he knew what he was doing. He'd watched his own father do it. He'd watched Robert Brooks put on a tie to go ask for a loan he'd already earned. Watched him practice his voice in the truck. Watched a grown man make himself smaller so somebody with money wouldn't be startled by the size of him. And Robert Brooks had died at 61, still owing that bank money, and still saying yes sir to men who called him by his first name. Calvin took his rag and threw it back on the bench where it always was. He took the parts washer and dragged it back where it had been, looked at the crack in the floor and said, "You stay right there." And that's how Ray Crail found him at 8:53, standing in the middle of his shop, arms crossed, staring at a crack in the concrete like it owed him money. "Cal, you feeling okay?" "Never better." Ray had his coffee. Ray always had his coffee. Tommy Pike was behind him, hands in his pockets. "Saw you out in the rain last night," Ray said. "That right, 22 minutes. Calvin looked up. "You timed me." "I looked at the clock a couple times." Ray grinned. $90,000 Rover in your lot and you were out there like a valet. "Tell me you charged her." Calvin said nothing. "Tell me you at least charged her something." "Cal." "Ray, what do you want? I want to understand you." And there was something in Ray's voice that was almost sincere. And that was the worst part of Ray Crail, that every once in a while a real man flickered behind the eyes and then went out again. "I genuinely do. You've got 24 days, you've got a kid and a rich girl parks in your lot with money falling out of her pockets, and you turn it down." "Explain that to me like I'm 5. She was crying, Ray." So Calvin shrugged. "That's the explanation." Ray shook his head. "That ain't an explanation, that's a bumper sticker." And then the lot went dark. Not dark, blocked. Something big came off Delford Street and swung into the gravel and stopped. And the light from Crail Precision's sign got cut off across the whole floor of Calvin's Bay. It was a Mercedes. Not a flashy one. Black, low, quiet. The kind of car that doesn't announce anything because it doesn't have to. And behind it, a second car. And behind that, a third. Tommy Pike said, Ray Crail turned around with his coffee halfway to his mouth and did not put it down and did not drink it. It just hung there in the air, 6 inches from his face, for what felt to Tommy like a full minute. The doors opened. The first man out was about 50 and built like a filing cabinet, and he did not look at Ray Crail, and he did not look at Calvin, and he looked at everything else. The roof lined the road, the alley behind the shop, the second bay, the exits. He did it in about 4 seconds. And then he stood by the rear door, and Victoria Whitmore got out of the car. She was smaller than Calvin expected. That was his first thought, and he'd remember it later and feel foolish about it. 51, maybe 52, gray coat, no jewelry that he could see except a wedding ring on a hand that hadn't had a husband on the other end of it in 11 years. Hair pulled back, tired around the eyes in a way that no amount of money had ever fixed for anybody. She looked at the building. She looked at the faded sign. BRKAUT and TIE. And she looked at it long enough that Calvin felt it in his stomach. Then she walked into his shop. "Mr. Brooks, ma'am." She put a folded paper on his counter and slid it across. My registration, she said. Calvin looked down at it. Then he picked it up and read it, all of it front and back. He took his time. He could feel Ray Crail behind him boring a hole in his back. And he took his time anyway. That's you, he said. That's me. All right then. And he handed it back to her. And Victoria Whitmore's mouth did something at the corner that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. Ray Crail stepped forward. Mrs. Whitmore, and Calvin heard it, heard the change, heard 52 years of Ray Crail evaporate and get replaced by a salesman. Ray Crail. Crail Precision, right across the street. 9 bays, factory certified, all the diagnostic equipment. If you're looking for a shop in this area, I'm not. Ma'am, with respect, I don't know what you've been told, but this place, Ray gestured. And here it came. Here was the thing Ray Crail could not stop himself from doing, even with 3 cars and a security detail in the lot. This place isn't equipped for a vehicle like yours. Calvin's a good old boy. He does what he can. But he's got 1 lift and no scanner. And Mr. Crail, how much do you charge for a brake job? Ray blinked. Depends on a 2009 Buick LaCrosse. Rear brakes, 74-year-old woman on a fixed income. The shop got very quiet. That'd be, he cleared his throat, that'd be in the neighborhood of 600. And what does he charge? She didn't point at Calvin. She didn't have to. Ray's coffee finally came down. He does it for 2. Why? Because he's... Ray stopped. Finish it. Victoria said it. Not loud, not mean, just a woman who had sat across from 400 men like Ray Crail in her life and had never once let one of them leave a sentence half-built. You started it. Finish it. Because he's what Ray Crail, standing in the shop he'd spent 9 years mocking, in front of a woman whose company insured half the trucks in the state, said in a voice like a man reading his own obituary, because he's soft. Said Victoria Whitmore, and she turned her back on him. Ray stood there for a second, then he walked out. Tommy Pike lingered by the door, and just before he left, he caught Calvin's eye. And Calvin would swear to this later. Tommy Pike gave him the smallest nod a human being has ever given another human being. Then he was gone too. Victoria didn't watch them go. Well, she said, I've been in this building 90 seconds, and I already understand it better than my security team did in 3 hours. You didn't have to do that. I didn't do it for you. Then who'd you do it for? She looked at him. Myself, she said. I've had a bad year, Mr. Brooks. That was the most fun I've had in 6 months. She brought a car for him to look at. It was in the 3rd vehicle, an old one, and that surprised him. It kept surprising him the whole time he had it in the air. A 1994 Chevrolet C1500, half-ton, red, faded to something closer to rust-colored. Manual windows. A dent in the driver's door about the shape of a knee. Calvin walked around it twice before he said a word. This isn't your truck. It's registered to me. Ma'am, that's not what I said. He crouched by the rear wheel. You didn't buy this truck. Nobody bought this truck. This truck got kept. Victoria Whitmore didn't answer. 61,000 original miles, and about 40 of it is one road over and over. Look at the wear on this tire versus that one. That's somebody driving the same 11 miles twice a day for 20 years. He stood up. Whose was it? Does it matter? It matters to how I fix it. She looked at the truck for a long time. My father's, she said. Uh-huh. He hauled gravel, had a pit outside Clarksville. 11 employees most years, some years 9. Her voice had changed. It had gotten flatter, and Calvin, who had spent 15 years listening to people talk while he had his head under a hood, knew exactly what a flat voice meant. He drove that truck to that pit every day from 1994 until 2003. And then he had a stroke in the cab, in the parking lot of a Hardee's. and he sat there for 40 minutes before anybody found him. Because he'd told everyone he was fine, and nobody argued with him about anything. Ever. I'm sorry, don't be. He was a difficult man. She put her hand on the fender flat, the way you'd touch a horse. I've had it in climate-controlled storage for 23 years. My people service it twice a year. They start it, they change the oil, they write me a report. And it's never run right since he died.
Victoria said it quietly.
Not once. Not one single day. I have paid... She stopped. I'm embarrassed to tell you what I've paid. Tell me. Somewhere over $90,000. Calvin laughed out loud before he could stop it. $90,000 on a truck worth about $4. Yes. To do what? To make it right, Victoria Whitmore said, and for 1 second, something came up out of that woman's face that Calvin recognized from about 1,000 mirrors. Rebuilt engine. New harness. New carburetor. They wanted to put fuel injection on it, and I told them absolutely not. They've replaced everything on it twice, 3 shops, 2 of them the best in the state, and every one of them hands it back and says, "Runs great, ma'am." And I get in it and I turn the key and... She stopped. And it's not it, Calvin said. She looked at him. That's right, she said quietly. It's not it. Calvin walked around to the driver's side and opened the door, and it groaned on the hinge. He stood there a second, listening to the groan. Get in, he said. I'm sorry. Get in and start it. I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to listen to it. Then I'm going to tell you what's wrong. Victoria Whitmore, in the gray coat that cost more than Calvin's furnace, got into a rusted-out 1994 Chevrolet and turned the key. It caught on the second crank and idled. Calvin stood 4 feet away with his arms folded and his eyes closed. He listened for about 12 seconds. Then he said, "Shut it off." She shut it off. "Well," she said, "what's wrong with it?" "Nothing." "Excuse me." "There's not one thing wrong with that truck," Calvin said. "It's the cleanest 94 small block I've heard in 10 years. Whoever did that rebuild did it right, and I'd be lying to you if I said different. And I don't lie to people about their cars." Victoria's hands were still on the wheel. "Then why doesn't it sound right?" And her voice cracked. It just cracked right down the middle, in front of a stranger, in a garage on Delford Street. Everyone tells me it's fine. Everyone tells me it's fine, and I sit in it, and it's not. And I've started to think Ma'am, they think I'm being sentimental. They think I'm a crazy woman with a truck. Victoria. He'd never used her first name, and he never used it again after that day. It's the mounts. She stopped. What motor mounts? Rubber ones. Calvin leaned on the door. They pulled that engine to rebuild it. Whoever put it back in used new mounts. Because that's what you do. That's correct. New mounts are stiff. They pass vibrations straight up through the frame into the cab. Your daddy's truck had 30-year-old mounts in it that were half-rotted and soft as a marshmallow. And they soaked all that up. He shrugged. So when you sit in that seat, you're feeling a different truck. Same engine, same everything. But it doesn't shake the way it shook when you were 9 years old sitting next to him. Victoria Whitmore did not move. That's what it is, Calvin said. That's the whole $90,000. Nobody told you because every shop you took it to was measuring it, and there's no gauge for that. She sat in the truck. She sat in it a long time. Then she said in a voice about the size of a dime, it shook so hard the radio knob would fall off. Yes, ma'am. He used to catch it without looking. Her hand went to the dash. He'd be talking and he'd just catch it. Screw it back on and keep talking. Yes, ma'am. Can you fix it? I can put the soft mounts in, Calvin said. Take me a day. Cost you about $110 in parts. And I want you to hear me, because this next part's the important part. Go ahead. It won't be him. The shop was quiet. It'll shake like it shook, Calvin said, and the knob will fall off, and you'll drive it out of here, and you'll get about 2 miles down the road, and you're going to feel worse than you feel right now, not better. Because for about 10 seconds, you're going to think he's in the passenger seat, and then you're going to remember he ain't, and that's... Calvin's throat worked. That's a thing you can't undo once you do it. So you think about it before you tell me yes. Victoria Whitmore looked up at him. How do you know that? She said. How do you know that it gets worse before it gets better? And Calvin Brooks stood in his own garage and heard himself say it out loud to a stranger for the first time in 11 years. Because I kept my wife's car for 2 years after she passed. He said it quiet. Kept it running perfect, started it every Sunday. And one Sunday I got in it, and it smelled like her. And I sat in my own driveway and I couldn't get out of it for 2 hours. And my little girl came and knocked on the window, 4 years old, knocking on the glass. And that's the last day I ever started it. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Sold it that August. Best $100 I ever lost. Victoria Whitmore's eyes were shining. Put the mounts in, she said. Ma'am, put the mounts in, Mr. Brooks. All right, Calvin said. All right then. He had the truck in the air by 11. She didn't leave. That was the thing that got him. She sent 2 of the 3 cars away and told the filing cabinet to wait outside, and she took off her coat. Actually took it off and hung it on a nail in the wall of a cinder-block garage. A coat that Calvin would later learn cost about $4,000, hung on a nail he'd driven in himself in 2011. And she sat on the stool by the toolbox, the one Amara sat on. And she watched him work for 3 hours. She didn't talk much at first. And then she did. He said something last night she said around noon. Sienna. She said one other thing before she went upstairs, and I've been chewing on it since. What'd she say? She said... Victoria stopped. Calvin kept his eyes on the mount bolt. She said, "Do you know how weird that is? That's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me." Victoria's voice was very steady, in the way voices get when they cost something. My daughter is 17 years old, and the strangest thing that has ever happened to her in her entire life is a person not wanting anything from her. Calvin didn't say anything. You're not going to say anything? I'm thinking. About what? About whether you want me to make you feel better or tell you the truth. Because you can only get one. And I'm not going to guess wrong twice in one day. Victoria Whitmore looked at him. The truth, she said. All right. Calvin set the wrench down and came out from under the truck and stood up and looked her in the eye. She drove 11 miles on a bare rim. I know. No, ma'am, I don't think you do. 11 miles. Sparks off the front end, noise like a chainsaw, and she didn't stop. He let that sit. You know how far 11 miles is at 40 miles an hour? That's 16 minutes. That girl sat in a car for 16 straight minutes with the front end coming apart underneath her, and she didn't notice. Or she noticed and she didn't care. And I've been turning that over since about 10 o'clock last night. And I don't like either one of those answers. And I don't have a third. Victoria Whitmore's face did not move, not one muscle. And Calvin understood watching her that this was a skill she had built over decades, and that it was right now holding up about 400 pounds. She has a therapist, she said. Okay, a very good therapist. Okay, she has... And then Victoria stopped. Her hand went up over her mouth. And she said from behind it, she has a therapist and a driver and a nutritionist and a college counselor, and she does not have anyone to call. No, ma'am, she told you that. She told me that. She's never told me that. You're her mother, Calvin said. You're the last one she'd tell. You're the one it would hurt. And Victoria Whitmore, who ran a company with 4,000 employees, put her face in her hands in a garage on Delford Street. Calvin got her a bottle of water, set it on the toolbox next to her without a word, went back under the truck, and left her alone with it. Because he'd learned a long time ago that the kindest thing you can do for a person who's coming apart is give them something to hold and quit looking at them. After a while, she said thickly, "This is the same thing you did to her." "Yes, ma'am. It works, doesn't it?" "It's just water," Calvin said. "No, it isn't." At 2:20, he dropped the truck off the lift, and she was standing there before it touched the ground. "Do you want to start it?" "No, ma'am. You start it. I want to hear it from out here first." "I'm not," she swallowed. "I'm not ready to be in it." So Calvin Brooks got into a dead man's truck and turned the key. It caught on the second crank, and it shook. It shook the whole cab. A low, ugly, beautiful lope that came up through the floor and into the seat and rattled the glass in the door. And on the dashboard. The radio knob shivered off its post and dropped, and Calvin caught it without looking, right hand off the seat. The way you catch something you've caught 1,000 times. Except he'd never caught it once in his life. He looked up. Victoria Whitmore was standing in the doorway of his shop with her hand over her mouth. And 11 years, and about $100 million, coming apart in her face. He shut it off. He got out. He put the knob in her palm and folded her fingers over it. She stood there and shook harder than the truck had. He didn't touch her. He just stood there with her, close enough that she wasn't alone in the room, far enough that she still had her dignity, which he had learned in 15 years is the exact distance people need. And there is no gauge for that either. It took about 4 minutes. Then she straightened up, wiped her face with the back of her wrist like a kid, laughed once, wetly, furiously. "Well," she said, "damn you." "Yes, ma'am, you told me it would get worse." "I did. You were right. I usually am about that." She looked at the knob in her hand. "What do I owe you?" "110 for the mounts and the labor." "There's no labor, Mr. Brooks, there's no labor, and I'd take it kindly if you didn't fight me on it. Because I've had that fight once already this week with your daughter, and I won, and I'd hate to break my streak." Victoria Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that changed the shape of the room. "There's a lien on this building." Calvin's face closed like a door. $18,240, she said. 23 days. "I'd like you to leave now, Mr. Brooks." "Ma'am, I mean it." His voice didn't rise. It got lower, and that was worse. "You go get your checkbook out in my shop, and I swear before God I'll put your daddy's truck back on the lift and put the hard mounts back in it and hand you the keys. And we'll call it even." "You would not." "Try me." And they stood there, a mechanic with $41 and a woman with 4,000 employees, staring each other down across a crack in a concrete floor. Victoria Whitmore did not get out a checkbook. She reached into her coat, took out her phone, and looked at Calvin. "May I ask you one question?" "Depends on the question." "How many trucks can you service in a week?" Calvin stopped. What? It's a straightforward question. If you had the bays, if you had the lifts, if you had a second man and a third man, how many commercial vehicles could you put through this building in a week at your standard, with your name on it? And Mr. Brooks, I want you to think before you answer, because I'm going to hold you to the number. Calvin Brooks stood in his own garage. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "what are you asking me?" "I have 406 vehicles in this state," Victoria Whitmore said. "Vans, box trucks, service pickups. Right now they're maintained by a national contract that costs me $2.4 million a year, and I have 300 pages of complaints about them." She held up the phone. "So I'm not going to give you $18,000, Mr. Brooks. I don't do that. I've never done that for anyone, and I'm not starting today." "Then what I'm going to ask you to bid," she said, and behind her, across the street, through 9 bright bays of glass, Ray Crail was standing at his window, watching a woman he'd called ma'am stand in Calvin Brooks's shop for the 4th straight hour. "Bid," Calvin said. "Bid on what?" "On the contract." Victoria put her phone back in her coat. $2.4 million a year. "Mr. Brooks, I'm putting it out to open bid in 14 days. 6 firms. National, regional, and if you can produce a proposal that doesn't embarrass either of us?" Calvin laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. "Ma'am, I've got 1 lift." "I'm aware. 1 lift, 1 man, and 23 days before a bank takes the building the lift is bolted to." "I'm aware of that too." "Then what in God's name—" He stopped, rubbed his face, started again slower. "You understand what you're doing right now. You're standing in a shop that's going under and you're telling a drowning man to enter a swimming contest." "Yes. That's cruel." "It might be," Victoria Whitmore said. "I've been called worse, and been right. Mr. Brooks, I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I'm about to say something that no one in my company would let me say if they were standing here." She took a step toward him. "If I write you a check today, do you know what happens? You keep your building for 11 months, then you're back here. Because the check doesn't fix the problem, and the problem isn't $18,000. The problem is that you charge $200 for a $600 job, and you've built a business that only survives if you never sleep. A check just delays it. And you'd hate me for the rest of your life, and you'd be right to. And a bid I can't win, that's better a bid you can win with 1 lift. Mr. Brooks, do you know why I'm firing my current vendor?" She didn't wait. 6 weeks ago, one of my box trucks came off the interstate outside Memphis. Brake failure. Driver's name was Denny Alvarado. He was 59. He'd been with us 19 years. He had a wife and a grandson. He walked away from it. He walked away because he was lucky, that's all. That's the only reason. And when we pulled the service records, that truck had been signed off. Signed off, initialed, dated, by a technician who never touched it. There's a name in the box. And the man was in Nashville that day. It's on camera. He was 200 miles from that truck. Calvin went still. $2.4 million a year, Victoria said, and I'm buying signatures. That's it. That's what I'm buying. 9 bays and a scanner and a man who signs a box. Ma'am, I don't need bays. Mr. Brooks, I can build bays. Bays are a purchase order. I have been trying for 18 months to buy the one thing that isn't for sale, and yesterday, it changed my daughter's tire in the rain for free. The shop was so quiet, Calvin could hear the compressor ticking as it cooled. You still have to bid, she said. You have to bid, and you have to win it in a room with 5 other firms and my CFO who is going to hate you on sight. Because if I hand it to you, every person in that company will know you were given it, and they will spend 2 years waiting for you to fail. But if you earn it in the room, they'll never be able to say a word. Calvin looked at the crack in his floor. 14 days. I don't know how to write a proposal. No, Victoria agreed. You don't. I've never written one in my life. I write on the back of envelopes. That's my whole system. Envelopes and a spiral notebook. Then you have 14 days to learn. And the bank? The bank is not my business, Victoria Whitmore said. Calvin's head came up sharp. She met him dead level. It isn't. It's yours. You want me to fix it, and I'm not going to, because the minute I do, you're my employee, and I don't want an employee. I've got 4,000 of those. I want a vendor. A vendor is a man who can look me in the face and tell me no. She picked up her coat off the nail. Mr. Brooks, my father borrowed $19,000 in 1979 from a bank that didn't want to give it to him. I've thought about that number my entire life. It's not a lot of money. It was everything. And nobody handed it to him either. She paused at the door. 23 days is a long time when you're not asleep. She was almost out when Calvin said it. Why do you really come here? She stopped. To thank you. You could have mailed a card. Victoria Whitmore stood in the door of a cinder-block garage with her father's truck idling in her ears. My daughter came home last night and looked at me, she said, the way she used to look at me when she was 6. For about 4 seconds. And I would burn that entire company to the ground to get 4 more. Then she left. Calvin stood there for a full minute after the cars pulled out. Then he walked over to the counter and picked up his spiral notebook and opened it to a clean page and wrote at the top in block letters, the way his father had taught him to write on a work order, Brooks Auto and Tire. He looked at it. He wrote underneath it, 406 vehicles. He looked at that. Then he sat down on the stool his daughter sat on, put both hands over his face, and said out loud to an empty shop, I don't know how to do this. That was 3:15 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. At 3:35, Amara got off the bus. She came in and threw her backpack in the corner and stopped, because her father was sitting on her stool with a notebook, which had never happened, not one time in her entire life. Dad! Hey, baby. Why are you sitting down? Because I'm thinking. You don't think sitting down. You think under a car. Well, today I'm thinking sitting down. He patted the workbench. Come here, I want to ask you something. And I want a real answer, not a nice one. She hopped up. You know how you said this shop's a safe place, yeah? If it got bigger, would it still be? Amara frowned at him. How much bigger? A lot bigger. Say 6 bays. Say I hired 3 foremen. Say there were trucks in and out of here all day and I wasn't the one turning every wrench. Would you still be here every day? Yeah, she shrugged. It's not the building, Dad. It's you. Calvin looked at his 8-year-old. How do you know that? Because Miss Marlene doesn't come here for the building. Amara said it with the withering patience of a child explaining weather to an adult. Have you seen the building? And Calvin Brooks laughed so hard he had to put the notebook down. He didn't sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of not sleeping. At 11, he was at the kitchen table with the notebook and a calculator he'd had since 2006. At 1 in the morning, he was still there. At 2, he got up and went and stood in Amara's doorway and looked at her for a while, then went back and sat down again. By 4, he had numbers. 406 vehicles. Preventive maintenance every 90 days, that's 4 visits a year. That's 1,624 service events. Call it 90 minutes average, some more, some less. Brakes and tires on top of it. He did it 3 times and got 3 different answers. Then did it a 4th time. Slow. Out loud. The way you check torque. 14,600 labor hours a year. He stared at that number until it went blurry. Then he wrote under it, I have 1 lift and 2 hands. And under that, need 6 bays, 5 techs, a service writer, software I don't own, insurance I can't afford, and a building the bank is taking in 22 days. And under that, because he was a Brooks. And because Robert Brooks had raised him to never leave a column without a total, he wrote, start anyway. At 6:10, he opened the shop. At 6:40, he called Tommy Pike. Tommy answered on the 4th ring, whispering, Mr. Brooks, Tommy, you at work? I'm in the parking lot. I've got like 4 minutes. How much does Ray pay you? Silence. Tommy. 18 an hour. How many hours? Whatever he says. 60 sometimes. He pay you overtime? Longer silence. Tommy. He calls it salary. Tommy Pike said it flat. He started calling it salary in April. Calvin closed his eyes. Come see me. Not today. Not where he can see you. Saturday, my house, 7 in the morning. I'll cook. Don't say yes right now, Tommy. Don't say yes right now. Go inside. Think about it. 2 days, he hung up. Then he made 40 more phone calls in 3 days. And that's the part nobody ever tells you about. Because it's not dramatic. It's just a man on a phone in a cold garage being told no. The equipment company wanted 40% down on lifts. The software outfit wanted a 2-year contract and a business credit score he did not have. The insurance broker laughed. Actually laughed out loud into the phone. Commercial fleet liability, sir. With your revenue, you'd need a bond. Do you know what a bond is? I know what a bond is. Then you know. He called the bank. Veeder picked up. Mr. Brooks Gordon, I need 30 more days. I can't do 30. I've got a shot at a $2.4 million contract. There was a pause. Calvin could hear the man's whole personality wrestling with itself. Do you have that in writing? No. Do you have a letter of intent? Do you have anything at all I could put in a file? I've got a woman's word. Whose? Victoria Whitmore's. The pause on that one lasted a long time. Mr. Brooks Vader said carefully, I want to be delicate here. Don't be. If I take that upstairs, they're going to think you're... He stopped. Say it. They're going to think you're not well, Vader said. That's what they're going to think. A man 20 days from foreclosure calls and says a billionaire is going to save him. Do you understand what that sounds like from this side of the desk? Yeah, Calvin said. I do. I'm sorry. I know you are, Gordon. That's what makes it worse. Ray Crail found out on Friday. Calvin never learned exactly how, though he had a guess, and the guess had khakis and a Thursday tea time. Ray came across the street at 4 in the afternoon. He wasn't carrying coffee. And that was how Calvin knew. Your bidding. Calvin kept his head under the hood. Word travels. You're bidding on the Whitmore fleet. Ray's voice cracked off the cinder block. Cal, are you out of your mind? I've got 9 bays. I've got a scanner. I've got a bond. And I've been trying to get a piece of that fleet for 4 years. 4 years. I sent them a proposal in 2022. They didn't even send a rejection. They just... nothing. And she walks into your place and stands there for 4 hours. And now you're bidding. Calvin came out from under the hood. That's right. Ray stared at him. And then something happened that Calvin didn't expect. Ray Crail's face did a thing it had never done in 9 years. It came apart. Just for a second, right in the middle. And what was underneath wasn't mean. It was scared. You know what I've got in that building? Ray said quietly. $1,100,000. That's what I've got in it. And it's not mine, Cal. None of it's mine. I owe every nickel of it. 9 bays. And I need 40 cars a week through them just to make the note. And there ain't 40 cars a week in this town. There's 20. And I've been fighting you for 20 of them for 9 years. Ray, I built that place facing you. Ray laughed. Awful. You know that I put the windows on this side on purpose? Everybody thinks it was to look down at you. It wasn't. It was so I could watch you. Because I couldn't figure out how a man with 1 lift and no sign was taking food off my table. Calvin didn't say anything. $200, Ray said. A brake job for $200. Do you know what that does to me? I can't do it for $200. I've got payroll. I've got a note. If I did it for $200, I'd be gone in a year. So you doing it makes me the villain every time. Every single time somebody sits in my waiting room, they're sitting there thinking Calvin would have done it for $2. That's not on me, Ray. Then who's it on? And there it was, out in the open at last, 9 years of it, standing in a garage. Calvin set his wrench down. It's on the fact that I don't have a note, he said quietly. I don't have 9 bays. I've got a paid-for building my daddy bought in 1988 and a lift from 1994. And I've never taken a vacation. That's how. That's the whole trick, Ray. There ain't a trick. I can charge $200 because I don't owe anybody but the bank. And now I owe the bank. And in 20 days, I'm going to be gone. And you're going to have your 20 cars. And you know what? You're not going to make the note anyway. Because the 20 cars was never the problem. Don't. Somebody ought to. Don't you dare. Ray. They don't come to me for the price Calvin said. They come to me because when Marlene Ellis walks into your shop, you look at her hip. You look at her hip and her coin purse, and you do the math on what she can be talked into, and she feels that. Everybody feels that. That's your problem. You built a 9-bay shop and put a man in it who can't stop counting. Ray Crail stood in Calvin Brooks's garage with his hands opening and closing. "You're going to lose," he said. "You know that. You're going to lose the bid and lose the building, and I'm going to buy this lot at auction for 40 cents on the dollar, and I'm going to put a parking lot on it. And I want you to know that I'm going to think about this conversation the whole time." "I know you will," Calvin said. "That's your other problem." Ray went out. At the door, he stopped, turned, and said the thing that made Calvin's stomach go cold. Because it was said in a totally different voice, flat and calm and businesslike, which Ray Crail had never once been. "Your girl rides the bus with mine." Calvin came off the fender. "What did you say?" "I'm just making conversation, Ray." "I didn't say a thing, Cal." Ray held up both hands, palms out, smiling. "I didn't say one thing. Have a good weekend." Tommy Pike came Saturday at 7. He stood on the porch in a jacket too thin for the weather and would not look up. "Come in, Tommy. I can't stay. Come in and eat, Tommy. It's 28 degrees out here." He came in. Amara set a plate in front of him without being asked. And Tommy Pike looked at that plate like it was the first thing anybody had put in front of him in a year. Maybe it was. Calvin let him eat before he said anything. That's a thing you learn. "Tommy, how long have you been at Crail?" 6 years. "You a good tech?" "I'm all right. That's not what I asked." Tommy put his fork down. "I'm the best tech in that building," he said, and it came out of him fast, like it had been sitting behind his teeth for 6 years. "I'm the only one who reads the service bulletins. I fix Dale's work twice a week, and Ray doesn't know it because I don't tell him. Because Dale's got a kid." "Then why are you making 18 an hour on a fake salary?" Tommy didn't answer. "Tommy, because he hired me when nobody else would." Tommy Pike said, "I've got a record. I was 20. It was stupid. It doesn't matter what it was. It was stupid. And I did 9 months. And I put in at 11 places, and Ray is the only one who called back. And he's never let me forget it. Not one day in 6 years. He doesn't have to say it out loud anymore. He just looks at me." The kitchen was quiet. 6 days a week, Tommy said. 60 hours. He calls it salary. And every time I open my mouth about it, he says, "Tommy, who else is going to have you?" He looked up. His eyes were wet and furious. "And the worst part, Mr. Brooks, is he's right. Who else is going to have me?" Calvin looked at him for a long moment. "Me," he said. Tommy laughed. "You're going under, probably. Everybody in town knows you're going under." "Yup." "Then what are you offering me, honest?" "What is this?" Calvin got up and got the spiral notebook off the counter and put it on the table and turned it around. "That's what I'm offering you." Tommy looked at it. Numbers, columns, 406 vehicles. "What is this?" "That's 14,600 labor hours a year if I win, which I probably won't." "Win what?" "The Whitmore fleet." Tommy Pike sat back. "You're serious." 24 an hour, Calvin said. "That's what I'm offering. 24. Time and a half after 40. Every hour goes on a card. The card goes in a drawer, and I don't call it anything but what it is. Health insurance in 6 months if I'm still standing. And Tommy," Calvin leaned forward, "nobody in my building ever signs a box on a truck they didn't touch. Not once. Not ever. That's the whole shop rule. There's one rule and that's it. You don't have the contract. No. You don't have the building past the 15th. No. You don't have anything." "Tommy," Calvin said it level, "I've got 20 days and a spiral notebook. And I'm asking you to quit a job to come work for a man who might be out of business before Christmas. I know exactly what I'm asking. It's insane. I'd tell my own daughter not to do it. Tommy Pike stared at that notebook. "Why me?" he said.
Because you wouldn't take Ray's bet.
Tommy's head came up. "Thursday night," Calvin said. "In the rain. He was at that window, betting you $20 I wouldn't charge that girl, and you wouldn't take it. I could see you both from the lot, Tommy, clear as day. You had your hands in your pockets, and you were looking at me like you were sick about it." Calvin shrugged. "A man who won't take a sure $20 because the bet's ugly? That's the whole interview. That's all I need to know about anybody." Tommy Pike put his face in his hands. "He'll ruin me," he said. "You know that. He'll call every shop in 3 counties. He'll tell them about the record." "Yeah, he will." "So if you go under, I've got nothing." "That's right," Tommy laughed, helplessly. "Mr. Brooks, that's the worst offer anybody's ever made me." "It's the only honest one," Calvin said. "That's all I've got." Tommy Pike sat in that kitchen for about 30 seconds. Then he said, "Monday. Tommy, Monday, 6:15. He stood up. His hands were shaking. He stuck one out anyway. "Mr. Brooks, I want it in writing, the 24 and the overtime. I want it on a piece of paper with your name on it, not because I don't trust you." His jaw worked. "Because I need to see it. One time in my life, I need to see it written down." Calvin got a pen. He wrote it on the back of an envelope, a foreclosure envelope, as it happened, because that's what was on the table, and signed it. And Tommy Pike folded it 4 times and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart, and did not take it out again for the rest of his life. Monday they started. Tuesday, Ray Crail called 11 shops in 3 counties. Wednesday, Marlene Ellis came into the shop with her coin purse and said, "Calvin, honey, I heard something at the Kroger. Miss Marlene, I heard you're bidding on the Whitmore trucks." She set the coin purse on the counter and opened it, and Calvin's heart dropped straight through the floor, because he knew what was coming. "No, ma'am." "Calvin Brooks, you don't even know what I'm—" Miss Marlene put it away. "It's $410. She said it fast, like she'd been practicing in the car. "It's from my sister's insurance in 2019. I've had it in a coffee can 11 years and I have never touched it. And I'm 74 years old and I don't need it. And if you say one word about my hip, I will hit you with this purse." Calvin Brooks stood behind his counter and could not speak. "You put brakes on my car," Marlene Ellis said. "And you didn't take my $30. And I sat in my kitchen that night and I cried, Calvin. And I'm not a crier. So you're going to take this, or I'm going to come in here every day for the rest of my life and make a scene, and I've got nothing but time." "Miss Marlene, take it." "I can't." "Why?" "Because it's $400, Calvin said. "And I owe $18,240. And it won't do a thing. That's why. It won't do one single thing except take your sister's money." And Marlene Ellis looked up at him and said in a voice he'd never heard out of her, "That's not for you to decide." She put it on the counter. "You've been deciding what people can give you for 15 years. Every one of us, you decide. And we sit there and we take it. And we say thank you. And you never once let anybody carry a thing back the other way. Do you know how that feels, Calvin? To be somebody who can only take?" Calvin's hands were flat on the counter. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I don't." "Well," she snapped the purse shut. "Now you do." She walked out, and Calvin Brooks stood there and looked at $410 on his counter, and cried, for the second time in 11 years. And Tommy Pike, God bless him, stayed under the truck and did not look up once. Thursday, the phone rang. Unknown number. He'd started answering those. "Mr. Brooks, this is Sienna." Calvin sat down. "Hey there, is it okay that I called? My mom's assistant had the number. It's fine. I wanted to say thank you. I didn't say it right that night. I said it, but She stopped. "I was a mess. You were fine. I was not fine. No, Calvin admitted. You weren't. She laughed. It sounded better than last time. How's the tire I got? The real one. Put on at a place they took 45 minutes and charged me $900. And the guy called me sweetheart in a way that made me want to throw up. A pause. You called me sweetheart. I did. It was different. Yeah. Mr. Brooks, and here her voice changed, and Calvin's stomach tightened. Because he'd heard it before. In a parking lot in the rain. My mom told me about the bid, and she told me you told her no about the money. That's between me and your mama. She's going to fight for you, Sienna said, in the meeting. She won't say it, but she is. I heard her on the phone with Mr.
Denworth. That's the CFO. He's been there 22 years, and he said... She stopped. Say it. He said, Victoria, if you hand $2.4 million to a one-bay garage because your kid had a flat tire, the board will have your head, and they'll be right. Calvin closed his eyes, and she said, he's going to bid like everyone else, and Mr. Denworth said, then he'll lose like everyone else, and at least it'll be quick. Calvin sat in his shop with the phone against his ear. Sweetheart, he said, can I tell you something true? Yeah. He's right. Don't say that. I've got one lift and 11 days and a guy named Tommy. That's my whole company. Your mama's CFO is not a villain. He's a man doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic says I lose. I'd say the same thing if I sat in his chair. Then why are you doing it? Calvin looked at the crack in his floor. Because my daughter told me this shop is a safe place, he said, and it's the only true thing anybody said about me in 15 years. And I'd like to find out if it's worth anything in a room where they count. Silence on the line. Then Sienna Whitmore said, very quietly, 9 days. The bid's in 9 days, and Mr. Brooks, they're not going to let you present last. They put you first. I saw the agenda on the counter. You're at 8 in the morning, and the national firms are at 11, and there's coffee and pastries at 10:30? Calvin sat very still. Say that again. You're first, Sienna said, before anybody's even awake. My mom doesn't know. Denworth built the agenda. And Calvin Brooks looked up at his ceiling and started very slowly to smile. A smile Tommy Pike saw from under the truck and would describe years later to anybody who'd listen as the exact moment he stopped being afraid. Sweetheart Calvin said, do me a favor and text me that agenda. Calvin didn't sleep that night, and this time it wasn't the arithmetic. He sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with his phone face up beside the spiral notebook and read the agenda for the 9th time. Brooks Auto and Tire, 8 a.m., 20 minutes. Fleet Corps National, 11 a.m., 60 minutes. Crail Precision Automotive, 1:30 p.m., 45 minutes. He read that last line twice. Then he set the phone down and said out loud to nobody, well, hell. Tommy Pike found out at 6:20 the next morning and had to sit down on an oil drum. He's bidding. Ray's in the room. He's at 1:30 and I'm at 8. Mr. Brooks. Tommy had his hands on top of his head. Mr. Brooks, he's gonna know I'm with you. The second I walk in that lobby, he's gonna... Then don't walk in the lobby. I'm not letting you go in there by yourself. No. Tommy Pike's voice cracked off the cinder block, and it surprised both of them. No, sir. 6 years. I kept my mouth shut in that building. 6 years. I'm not going to sit in a garage on the 15th and read about it. Calvin looked at him for a second. 20 minutes, he said. That's all they gave me. 20 minutes at 8 in the morning before anybody's had coffee. And Ray gets 45 at 1:30 when they're full of lunch. You know what that means? It means they already picked. It means 20 minutes is a knife, Calvin said, and 45 is a speech. Nobody ever got talked into anything in 20 minutes. But you can get cut in 20 minutes. Tommy stared at him. You're enjoying this. No, Calvin said, but I've stopped being scared of it. And those feel about the same from the outside.
9 days. The first thing he did was the thing nobody expected, which was that he didn't write anything at all for 3 of them. He drove. He took Marlene Ellis's $410 because he'd taken it. He'd finally taken it. And it sat in his shirt pocket like a live coal. And he put it in the gas tank of his truck. And he drove to the Whitmore distribution yard off Route 9 at 4:30 in the morning. And he parked across the road. And he waited. At 5, the drivers started coming in. He got out and walked over with 2 boxes of donuts and a thermos. The first man to reach him was about 60 and looked at him the way a man looks at somebody selling something. "Help you?" "Probably not," Calvin said. "You?" "Denny Alvarado." The man stopped walking. "Who's asking?" Calvin Brooks. "I fix cars on Delford Street." "That doesn't answer my question." "No, sir, it doesn't." Calvin held out the donuts. "I'm bidding on your maintenance contract, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't here for a reason. So there's your answer. I brought donuts, and I'd like 15 minutes of your morning. And if you tell me to get in my truck and go, I'll go, and I won't say a word about it." Denny Alvarado looked at him a long moment. "You're the one from the garage," he said. "With the girl." Calvin blinked. "How do you—" "Mister, there's 400 drivers in this company, and about 9 of us have anything to talk about." Denny took a donut. "You want 15 minutes? You've got 15 minutes. But I'll tell you right now. 3 vendors have come out here in 19 years, and every one of them brought a clipboard. I don't have a clipboard." I noticed. By 6, there were 11 men standing around Calvin's tailgate. By 6:30, there were 19. And Calvin Brooks did not say one word about himself. He asked questions. That's all he did. He stood there with a spiral notebook and asked drivers what was wrong with their trucks. And something happened that he hadn't planned on and never forgot. They wouldn't stop talking. "Number 2's got a shimmy at 55. Been telling them 2 years. 2 years. They write it up. No fault found. Every time, no fault found. They drive it. Do they drive it when you write it up? Does a technician get in that truck and take it to 55 on the highway?" The men looked at each other. Mr. Somebody said, "They don't even start half of them." Calvin looked up from the notebook. "Say that again?" They pull it in the bay, pop the hood, put the sticker on. 15 minutes. I've watched them. 15 minutes. 12 one time. I timed it because I was mad. And they charge... Calvin flipped a page. They bill your company $480 a unit for a 90-day PM. 19 men went quiet. Denny Alvarado said very slowly, "How much?" "Yeah, $480 for 12 minutes." And Calvin Brooks stood in a gravel lot at 6:30 in the morning and understood in one clean piece that he wasn't bidding against Fleetcor National. He was bidding against a lie that had been running unchallenged for 6 years. "Mr. Alvarado," he said, "can I ask you something? And I want the true answer, not the polite one." "Go ahead." "That wreck outside Memphis." Denny's face closed. "That's done." "Yes, sir. I know it is. They gave me 3 weeks off and a card. Whole yard signed it." "I'm not asking about the card." Calvin put the notebook down on the tailgate, closed it, put his hand on it. "I'm asking, before it happened, did you write it up?" The lot went so quiet you could hear the interstate a mile off. Denny Alvarado stood there with a donut in his hand. "4 times, he said. Say it again." "I wrote that truck up 4 times in 5 months. Denny's voice didn't rise. It got very, very level. And that was worse. Soft pedal, long pedal. I wrote brakes on a green card and put it in the box on the wall 4 separate times, and 4 separate times a sticker came back that said, serviced. And the 5th time I was doing 62 coming down the grade at Millington. And the pedal went to the floor, and I put it in a ditch. And when I got out of the truck, you know what I thought? Standing there in the weeds, with my hands shaking, what I thought? They're going to say it was me. 19 men stood in a parking lot at dawn. Not one of them moved. 19 years, Denny said. 19 years. And a grandson. And I'm standing in a ditch thinking they're going to say I rode the brakes. That's what that company made me. Calvin Brooks looked at that man for a long time. Then he said, Mr. Alvarado, I'm going to ask you for something. And it's a big thing. And you can say no. What? 9 days from now, I've got 20 minutes in a room with the people who signed that check. Calvin picked up the notebook. I don't have slides. I don't have a firm. I've got one lift and a man named Tommy. What I'd like, if you're willing, is for you to tell them what you just told me. Denny Alvarado laughed. It was an ugly sound. They ain't gonna let a driver in that room. No, Calvin agreed. They're not. Then what? So you'd have to walk in with me, Calvin said. Ray Crail figured it out on day 5. He came across the street at 4 in the afternoon. He didn't yell, and that was how Calvin knew it was going to be bad. You went to the yard. I did. You went to the yard and you talked to drivers. Ray was almost admiring. Almost. That's Cal. I've got to hand it to you. That's the only move you had. And you found it. I've been in this 9 years and I never thought of it once. That's the difference between us, Ray. No, it ain't. Ray smiled. The difference between us is I've got a bond and you've got a feeling. He put his hands in his pockets. You know what I did today? I called Whitmore's compliance office. Nice lady, very thorough. I told her there's a bidder in the pool employing a convicted felon, and I wondered if that squared with their vendor policy, seeing as their trucks go on federal highways. Tommy Pike came out from under the truck so fast he took skin off his knuckles. You son of a... Tommy. Calvin didn't even look at him. Get back under the truck. He what? Get back under the truck, Tommy. Tommy didn't move. Ray looked at him. His face went soft and terrible. Tommy, he said, I gave you a job when you had nothing. Nothing. Not a soul in this county would touch you, and I put you in a bay, and I fed your family for 6 years, and this is... He gestured at the shop. You didn't even tell me. 6 years, and you didn't have the guts to look at me and say it. And Tommy Pike, 26 years old, with an envelope folded 4 times in his shirt pocket, said, You never once said my name, Ray. Ray stopped. What? 6 years. Tommy's whole body was shaking. You called me Pike. You called me kid. You called me my guy. You never said Tommy, not one time. He said it inside of 9 seconds. And he cooked me eggs. Ray Crail looked at him. That's what this is? He said. Eggs. Yeah, Ray, Tommy said. That's what this is. Ray turned to Calvin. His voice dropped, and it was the flat, businesslike one again, the one that made Calvin's stomach cold. Compliance is going to call you, probably Monday. Ray started back across the gravel, then stopped. That bank paper, the 15th, that's 4 days after the bid. I know when it is. So even if you walk in that room and do the greatest 20 minutes in the history of the world, Ray spread his hands. They can't give a $2.4 million contract to a company that doesn't own a building. There's not a CFO alive who'd sign that. You know that, right? You know that. Calvin said nothing. That's what I mean about you, Ray said, almost gently. You think being right is the same as winning. It ain't. It never has been, not one day in the history of this country. And he walked back across the street to his 9 bright bays. Compliance called Monday. The woman was polite and pleasant. Asked in the tone of somebody reading from a laminated card whether Brooks Auto and Tire employed any individual with a felony conviction in a role with access to fleet assets. Yes, ma'am, Calvin said. 1. There was a pause. You're I'm sorry you're confirming that, ma'am. You asked me a question. Do you want the answer, or do you want me to dance, Mr. Brooks? Most vendors would say they'd look into it and call back Thursday. Calvin said, His name's Thomas Pike. He's 26. He served 9 months when he was 20. He's the best technician in this county. And he's the only man I'd let put brakes on a truck my daughter rides behind. And if that disqualifies me, then disqualify me. But do it today so I can get back to work. A very long pause. Mr. Brooks, the woman said, and her voice had lost the laminate. Off the record, I've made 200 of these calls. Nobody's ever just said yes. The night before, he couldn't eat. Amara sat across from him and pushed her food around and watched him not eat his. And finally she said, Dad, you're going to throw up. I might. Are you scared? Yeah, Calvin said. I am. She put her fork down. She'd never heard him say it. You want to hear something? He said. When I was 23 years old, I broke down outside Knoxville with your mama in the passenger seat and $11 in my pocket. And a man stopped. I ever tell you that 100 times? Right. He pushed his plate away. Well, here's the part I never told you. That night, after Earl fixed the water pump and wouldn't take a dime and drove off, your mama sat in that car and she said, Cal, that's the kind of man I want you to be. He looked at his hands. And I said, baby, that man's got a wrecker and a driveway and a house. I've got $11. And she said, he stopped. What did she say? She said, he stopped. He didn't have any of that in 1971 either. Amara didn't say anything. 15 years I've been chewing on that, Calvin said. And tomorrow at 8 in the morning, I get 20 minutes to find out if she was right. She was right. You don't know that, baby, Dad. Amara Brooks looked at her father across a kitchen table. Mama was right about everything. You told me that yourself. He got there at 6:40 for an 8 o'clock. Denny Alvarado was already in the lobby. So was Tommy Pike. In a shirt with a collar, sitting on the edge of a chair like a man in a waiting room at a hospital. And so were 4 other drivers. Calvin stopped in the door. Denny, don't start. Denny. I asked for one. Yeah, well. Denny Alvarado stood up. Word got around. They'll fire you, mister. We talked about that in the yard for about an hour last night. Denny shrugged. You want to know what we came up with? Ain't a one of us said a true word in this building in 19 years. Figured we'd try it once and see what it costs. At 7:58, a woman came out and said, Mr. Brooks. They're ready. Calvin stood up. Then he sat back down, put his head down for about 4 seconds, and Tommy Pike heard him say very quietly, All right, Daniel. Then he got up and went in. There were 9 people around the table. One of them was Victoria Whitmore at the far end. She did not look at him, and Calvin understood immediately that she had been told not to. The man in the middle stood up. Harold Denworth, Chief Financial Officer. He did not offer his hand. Mr. Brooks, before we start, I want to be transparent with you because I think it's a kindness. Do you know why you're on this agenda? Yes, sir. Denworth blinked. You do. Because your CEO asked for me and you couldn't say no to her face. So you put me at 8 in the morning in front of a room that's still cold. And you gave the national firm 60 minutes at 11 with pastries at 10:30. That's why I'm on the agenda. The room went absolutely silent. Victoria Whitmore looked at the table and something happened at the corner of her mouth. Denworth sat back down slowly. That's not an accusation, sir. It's just the truth of the room. And I've only got 20 minutes, so I figured we'd start with it and save 4. Mr. Brooks, Denworth said, you have 1 lift. Yes, sir. 1 lift, 1 technician. And I have it here. Calvin placed the foreclosure notice on the table. A foreclosure notice on your property, with a sale date 4 days from today. Yes, sir. And you're bidding on $2.4 million a year. No, sir, Calvin said. Denworth stopped. I beg your pardon? I'm not bidding 2.4. Calvin put the spiral notebook on the table. I'm bidding 1.4. Somebody's pen hit the table. That's... Denworth's voice changed. Mr. Brooks, that's $1 million under the incumbent. Yes, sir. That's not a bid. That's... Nobody can do the work for that. That's not possible. It's possible, Calvin said, if you actually do the work. Explain that. Your current vendor bills $480 a unit for a 90-day preventive maintenance. 4 visits a year, 406 trucks. That's $780,000 a year in PMs alone. Now, sir, I've been doing preventive maintenance for 15 years. A real one on a box truck is 90 minutes. 90 minutes of labor, filters, oil, a brake inspection where a man actually pulls a wheel. And they're doing them in 12, Calvin said. The room did not move. Excuse me, 12 minutes, some of them 15. Calvin opened the notebook. I've got 19 drivers who've watched them do it. I've got dates, I've got truck numbers, I've got a man in your lobby right now who wrote up his brakes 4 times on a green card and got 4 stickers back. And put a box truck in a ditch outside Millington at 62 miles an hour. Harold Denworth went white. That is... Mr. Brooks, that is a very serious... Yes, sir, it is. You cannot come into this room and make an allegation like that without... Sir, I'm not making an allegation, Calvin said. I'm making a bid. And the reason my bid is $1 million lower than theirs isn't because I'm cheap. It's because I'm not charging you for 78 minutes of nothing, 4 times a year, on 406 trucks. That's the whole million. That's it. That's the entire difference. You're not overpaying for labor, sir. You're overpaying for air. Denworth stared at him. Somebody at the far end of the table cleared their throat and said, Harold, I ran that number while he was talking. 78 minutes times 1,600 events. It's... He looked up. It's $940,000. Nobody said anything. Mr. Brooks, Denworth said, his voice had gone very careful. Even if every word of that is accurate, you have 1 lift. You physically cannot service 406 vehicles. No, sir, not today. Then this conversation is academic. Sir, may I ask you a question? That's not really how... Just one. Denworth waved a hand. How long does it take you to build a bay? Calvin said. I'm sorry, a bay, a lift, a pad, a compressor line. If your company decided today, how long? Denworth looked at the man beside him. 6 weeks, the man said. Maybe 8. 6 weeks, Calvin repeated. So the thing I don't have takes 6 weeks and a purchase order. He put both hands on the table. Now, sir, how long does it take to build a man who won't sign a box he didn't touch? Nobody answered. I've been trying to figure that out for 15 years, Calvin said. Because I'd like to hire 4 of them. And I'll tell you what I've come up with. There's no purchase order for it. You can't buy it. You can't rent it. You can't fire your way into it. You can only find it. And when you find it, mister, you're looking at a man who's usually broke. Every time, every single time, because that's the price of it. He tapped the notebook. You've got 9 bays and a scanner and a bond 3 miles from here. At a shop where the owner looks at a 74-year-old woman's hip before he quotes her. He's on your agenda at 1:30. He's got everything I don't. And in 4 years, he'll do to you exactly what Fleetcourt did to you, and you'll be sitting in this room again with a stack of green cards and a man in a ditch, wondering how it happened again. Harold Denworth sat very still. You're asking us, he said slowly, to take a leap of faith. No, sir. Calvin shook his head. I'm not asking you for one thing. I'm 20 minutes into the worst month of my life, and I've got 4 days left on my building, and I'd rather chew glass than ask you for anything. He picked up the notebook. I'm asking you to go look at truck 212. Denworth blinked. What 212? It's in your yard right now. Bay 4, back row. It's got a shimmy at 55 that's been written up 11 times in 2 years and come back no fault found 11 times. Calvin closed the notebook. I didn't touch it. I'm not authorized to touch it, but I stood next to it Tuesday morning and I looked at the front tires from 6 feet away. And sir, that's a bad tie rod end. And I'd bet this building on it, which, as you pointed out, I've only got 4 days of anyway. The room was dead silent. Send anybody, Calvin said. Send your worst man. Send Fleet Corps. It's a $9 part. And it's been 11 times through a shop that charges you $4.80 a visit, and there's a man who drives that truck at 55 miles an hour every single day, with a grandson at home. He put the notebook back in his coat. That's my bid. 1.4. 6 bays in 90 days. 3 techs I'll name in writing. And every card signed by the hand that turned the wrench, and if you ever catch one that isn't. You tear the contract up that day, no notice, no cure period, and I'll drive the truck back myself. He stood up. Mr. Brooks Denworth said, Sir, that's my 20 minutes. There are 4 drivers and a man named Denny Alvarado in your lobby who took the morning off without pay to stand in that room, and they're going to get in trouble for it. And I'd take it as a kindness if somebody told them it was worth it. He pushed the chair in. Ma'am. And for the first time he looked down the table at Victoria Whitmore. The truck sounds right. That's all. That's the only thing I came to say to you. He was at the door when Harold Denworth said in a completely different voice, Mr. Brooks. Calvin stopped. Denworth was looking at the phone in his hand. He'd typed something during the last 90 seconds. Somebody had answered. I just had our yard supervisor walk out to Bay 4, he said. The room turned. Denworth read it twice. Then he set the phone down very carefully, like it might go off. 212 is in the back row, he said. It's got a tie rod end with about a 1/4 inch of play in it, and he says... Denworth stopped, swallowed. He says he can move the wheel with his hand. Nobody breathed. It's scheduled out at 4:30 this morning, Denworth said. It's on the board. It's got a load of medical supplies going to Jackson. And Victoria Whitmore stood up at the end of the table. Pull it, she said. Victoria, pull it now, Harold. Denworth was already dialing, and Calvin Brooks stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame and his heart going like a compressor, and watched 9 people in that room turn and look at a mechanic in a clean shirt who had just told them the truth for free, same as he'd done in a rainstorm 11 days ago, for a girl who couldn't stop crying. Harold Denworth hung up. He stood there a second, then he turned around and looked at Calvin. And he was a man who had been doing arithmetic for 22 years, and had just been handed a number he could not make come out. Sit down, Mr. Brooks, he said. Sir? Sit down. Denworth pulled out the chair himself. You've got lift one technician and a foreclosure sale in 96 hours, and I have absolutely no idea what to do with you. He sat down across from him. So let's start there. Harold Denworth said, Tell me about the bank. There's nothing to tell about the bank, Calvin said. I owe $18,240. They want it Friday. I don't have it. Can you get it? No, sir. Mr. Brooks, sir. I've made about 60 phone calls in 11 days. Every bank inside 100 miles, 2 credit unions, a finance company in Memphis that wanted 31%, and I'd have taken it. And they said no anyway. There's nothing to get. I'm not being brave about it, it's just the number. Denworth looked down the table. Victoria, don't, she was still standing. Don't look at me. Harold, it's not my decision, and it never was. It's 2.4 million. It's 1.4, Calvin said, and you're asking this company to award it to a man who will not own a building on Monday? I'm not asking anybody for anything, Calvin said. I've said that twice now, and I'll say it a 3rd time, and then I'll go. I came in here to tell you what's wrong with your trucks. That's the only thing I know how to do. I've told you. You can do whatever you want with it. He stood up again. And Harold Denworth, 22 years, a man who had never once in his professional life done a thing he couldn't defend in a footnote, said, "Sit down, please, sir. Mr. Brooks, I am asking you a favor." And it stopped Calvin cold, because you could hear what it cost him. "Give me 40 minutes. I have a bidder at 11 whose invoices I now have to look at differently. And I would like to be able to look at them with you in the building, that's all. Sit in the lobby. Drink our coffee. 40 minutes. Calvin sat in the lobby for 2 hours and 10 minutes. Denny Alvarado sat beside him the whole time and didn't say a word until the 90-minute mark, when he said, "They pulled 212 off the board." "I heard. Fella came out and told us. Yard supervisor wouldn't look at me." Denny turned the coffee cup in his hands. 19 years, mister. 19 years. I wrote it on green cards, and you looked at it from 6 feet away. Anybody could have seen it, Denny. No. Denny Alvarado said it firm. That's the thing you don't understand about yourself. And I'll say it once, and then I'll leave it alone. Anybody could have looked. Nobody did. At 10:50, a black SUV pulled in, and Ray Crail got out of it, 3 hours early, pressed shirt, leather folder under his arm. He came through the lobby doors and stopped dead. Calvin Brooks and Tommy Pike and 5 drivers sitting in a row. Ray stood there. Cal, Ray. Ray's eyes went down the row of them, and Calvin watched a man do arithmetic in real time and get an answer he didn't like. "What did you do?" Ray said. "I told him the truth." "About what?" "About 12-minute PMs. Ray Crail's face changed by degrees. And Calvin, who had known him 9 years and hated him for most of them, felt something he did not expect, which was pity. Because Ray had bid 2.1. He'd told Tommy that years back, bragging. 2.1. And he thought he was the hungry one in the room. And he'd built his whole number on the same lie he was bidding against. And he hadn't even known it was a lie. He'd just assumed everybody stole a little. He'd assumed that was the business. You bid under him. Ray said. "1 million under." "A mil," Ray laughed, and it came out wrong. "You can't do the work for that." "I do the work for that every day, Ray," Calvin said. "You've been watching me do it out your window for 9 years and calling me soft." Ray stood in that lobby with his folder. Then he said quietly, "You know I don't have another 4 years in me. That building, I know, Ray. 9 bays, I know." And Ray Crail went in and did his 45 minutes at 1:30, and he was good. He was polished. He had slides. And Harold Denworth asked him one question at the end, which was, "How long does a 90-day PM take in your shop?" And Ray said, "We're very efficient. We're usually in and out in under an hour." And something went out of the room like air out of a tire, and Ray felt it, and didn't know why. They called Calvin at 4:15 the next afternoon. He was under a Corolla. Tommy answered and said, "Mr. Brooks," in a voice that got Calvin out from under that car faster than he'd moved in a decade. It was Denworth. "Mr. Brooks." "2 questions, and I need honest answers, not modest ones." "Yes, sir." 6 bays in 90 days. Can you actually do it if somebody signs a purchase order Monday? "Yes, sir." "Concrete's the long pole. 60 days if the weather holds." "Second question." A pause. "You said you'd name 3 technicians in writing." "Name them." "Thomas Pike. He's standing right here. And I don't have the other 2 yet," Calvin said. Silence. "You understand what you just did," Denworth said. "I told you I don't have them, Mr. Brooks. Every other bidder handed me a roster of 40 names. Fleet Corps' roster has a man on it who's been dead since March. I checked this morning." Denworth exhaled. "You had a chance to lie to me, and you used it to tell me you have 1 employee." "I've got 1 employee, sir." "Yes," Harold Denworth said. "I know, that's the entire problem, and it may be the entire answer. And I've been awake since 3 trying to decide which." The board met on Thursday. The foreclosure sale was Friday at 10. Calvin Brooks did not hear one word all day Thursday. He worked, put a water pump in a Camry, did an alignment by eye on a Ranger because his machine was from '98. At 6, he closed out the register, $360. Best day he'd had in a month. And it didn't matter. And he counted it twice anyway. Amara did homework under the lamp. Dad, yeah, baby, if they take the shop, where do we go? Calvin sat down on the stool. I don't know, he said. Probably Clarksville. There's shops in Clarksville. I'd get on somewhere. I'm a good mechanic. Would you have your name on the building? No, baby. Amara looked at her homework for a while. That's okay, she said. You'd still be the one who does it right. And Calvin Brooks put his head down on his own workbench in his own garage and laughed until it turned into the other thing. And his daughter came over and put her hand on the back of his neck, 8 years old, and didn't say anything because she'd learned it from him. At 6:40 the next morning, 3 hours and 20 minutes before the sale, a black Mercedes came off Delford Street and stopped in the gravel. Victoria Whitmore got out alone. No cars behind her. No filing cabinet. Calvin was standing in the bay with a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. Mr. Brooks, ma'am. She stood there a second. I'm not permitted to be here, she said. Legal told me not to come. Harold told me not to come. My head of communications told me not to come. And then went and sat in his car. Then why'd you come? Because I wanted to say it out loud in this building instead of on a phone. Victoria Whitmore said, You won. Calvin didn't move. Say it again. You won the contract. 1.4, 6 bays in 90 days. Capital advanced against the contract at 4%. That's a loan, Mr. Brooks. It's on paper, and you'll pay every dime of it back, and Harold will personally enjoy collecting it. 9-1 on the vote, she paused. Harold voted yes. Calvin set the coffee down. Because his hand wasn't steady. Why? Because he pulled the Fleet Corps invoices for 6 years, Victoria said. $11 million. He found 41 service events billed on days the trucks were logged out on the road. He'd signed off on every one of them, every single one, for 6 years. She looked at him. He came into my office at 2 in the morning and he said, Victoria, a man with one lift, saw it in 11 days. And I didn't see it in 6 years. And I don't know how I'm supposed to live with that. And I said, Vote your conscience, Harold. And he said, That's what I'm afraid of. Calvin stood in his garage. The bank, he said, the bank is not my business, ma'am. Mr. Brooks, I told you 19 days ago I would not write that check, and I meant it. And I still mean it. Victoria Whitmore's chin came up. I did do one thing. I'm going to tell you what it was. And you can be as angry as you like. I had my counsel send First Cumberland a copy of an executed vendor agreement worth $1.4 million a year for 5 years with your name on it. And a letter stating that the agreement is contingent on your continued ownership of this parcel. She shrugged. That's not a gift. That's a fact. They can do whatever they want with a fact. Gordon Vader called at 8:51. Calvin picked it up on the first ring. Mr. Brooks. Vader's voice was strange. The sale's off. Calvin closed his eyes. They restructured it, Vader said. 7 years, 6.2%. It's, Mr. Brooks, I want to tell you something. And then I'm going to hang up and go be sick in the parking lot. I've worked here 4 years. I have never seen the committee reverse a foreclosure, not once. And a man upstairs looked at that letter this morning and said, Well, we're not going to be the bank that foreclosed on him. A pause. Not because it was right. Because of how it would look. I know, Calvin said. Does that bother you? Calvin Brooks looked at the crack in his concrete floor. Gordon, he said, I stopped needing it to be pretty about 15 years ago. I just needed the door open at 6:15. The concrete crew broke ground on the 4th of January. They poured 6 bays and a lube bit. And the day they poured it, Calvin Brooks walked out with a stick and knelt down, and before it set, he wrote in the wet concrete in the far corner where the parts washer would go, RB 1988, DB, always. Tommy Pike ran 3 texts by March and 4 by June. He put every card in a drawer with the hand that turned the wrench on it. And on the day the state auditor came through and pulled 40 of them at random, the man looked up from the drawer and said, "Who taught you to document like this?" And Tommy Pike said, "My boss," and did not elaborate. Denny Alvarado got a card in the mail in February with a check in it and a note from a CFO he'd never met. And he never told anybody what the note said. And he kept it in the visor of truck 212 until the day he retired. Ray Crail sold Crail Precision Automotive in September. Calvin heard about it before it happened. Because Delford Street is 400 feet wide and there are no secrets on it. He walked across the street on a Tuesday afternoon. First time in 9 years. Ray was sitting in his own waiting room in a leather chair with the TV on with no sound. "Come to look," Ray said. "Come to make an offer." Ray laughed. "You going to buy me for 40 cents on the dollar, Cal? That'd be something. That'd be a real something." "No," Calvin said. "I want to buy your 9 bays for what they're worth. And I want you to run them." Ray Crail's head came up. "What?" "I need a fleet manager." Calvin sat down across from him. 406 trucks, and I'm turning wrenches on them myself at 40 years old because I don't know how to stop. You've run 9 bays for 9 years and made payroll every Friday in a town with 20 cars in it. Ray, that's not nothing. That's actually pretty hard. You hate me. I did. I called your kid's bus route a threat, Cal. I know exactly what you did, Calvin said, and I'm not asking you to forget it. Because I'm not going to. Here's the deal. You work for me. You never quote another price in your life. I do that. You never look at another woman's hip. And the first time you look at somebody's coin purse and do the math, you're done. And I won't yell. I'll just open the door. Ray Crail sat in his own waiting room with his hands over his face for a long time. Why, he said, muffled, because somebody stopped for me outside Knoxville in 1994, Calvin said. And I've been trying to pay him back for 30 years, and I can't. He's dead. There's no way to do it. The only thing you can do with it is hand it to the next person. And Ray, he stood up. You're the next person. You're just standing there. That's all that ever is. Ray Crail worked for Calvin Brooks for 11 years and never once quoted a price. Sienna Whitmore came into the shop most Saturdays that first year, and then most Saturdays for 4 years after that. She and Amara sat on the toolbox and ate sandwiches and argued about music. And she learned to run a torque wrench badly. And she told her mother in her 3rd year of college that she was switching out of finance. And Victoria Whitmore said, to what Sienna said, anything where somebody hands me a bottle of water. And Victoria didn't understand it, and signed the form anyway. On a Friday evening in May, 20 months after a girl drove 11 miles on a bare rim, they turned on the sign. It cost $4,000, and Calvin argued with the man about it for 6 weeks. It said Brooks Auto and Tire, and underneath in smaller letters, because Amara had insisted, and because he'd never once won an argument with her. EST. 1988. The whole street came out. Marlene Ellis stood in front with her coin purse. Denny Alvarado brought his grandson. Tommy Pike stood at the back with his hands in his pockets and an envelope folded 4 times in his shirt. Amara Brooks, 10 years old, looked up at the light coming on over her father's name. Dad, she said, I knew this place would become something special. Calvin Brooks looked at his shop, at the 6 bays and the 9 across the street, at the drivers and the old women and the men who worked for him, at a crack in the concrete he had never once filled in. Baby, he said, it was always special. He put his hand on his daughter's shoulder.
People just finally looked.